Wait,
Hello, good evening. How's everyone doing? I hope everybody had a great Friday. Everybody's got big plans or no plans for the week. Either way, it always works out. I'm Max, and tonight we're going to talk about a couple things that are interesting for me, and I'm going to share with you my opinion, my insight, my viewpoint on them, and you can chime in if you're there and listening, and if you're not there and you get a chance to watch, see what you think about what I have to say. But I wanted to start out, look and see what I was going to initially start out with, and it was going to be grading, and then I was going to transition that into all the influx of the collectors that have come into the hobby since pandemic times, and how, in turn and in large, that has affected the hobby, and give you my take on that. So, grading. And I hate to assume anything, but for me to assume that everybody's familiar with card grading, I am just going to put out that grading a card is basically taking a card and submitting it to a third party, which at that point is going to not only authenticate the card and assuming it is authentic, regardless of what it is, they will then proceed to grade the card. The four standards of grading. Excuse me, I've been a little under the weather today. I don't know, we had some weather change and I haven't been feeling all the greatest, but I want to make sure that I'm online and stay consistent with what I do. So I thank everybody who gets a chance to tune in and watch, and I appreciate it very much. But what what I was saying when it comes to the card grading, and I have no problem with graded cards. I think that graded cards are cards that are basically put in a case, which after the card is graded, it is given a value depending on which grading company you go with. Generally, it's on a 1 to 10 basis. Sometimes they're half grades, but we'll just stick simply on a 1 to 10 basis. This, for the most part, is done in whole subjectively versus objectively, to where someone may be biased potentially, and you can't say that that isn't a possibility, to where they might lose that objectivity and we put in their own opinion, and that then turns it into subjectivity, which is going to be based on what they think, feel, see. They can justify it and make it germane in any way they so please. But basically, at the end of all this process of looking at the corners, looking at the centering, looking at the edges, and looking at the surface and overall condition of the car, that's going to be assigned a grade. So, based upon how well it has done, and these guys, they invest money into the right equipment, lights, scanners, etc., to make sure that it's authentic and the condition that they give it, the grade that is associated with it, is justified. So, with that being said, in grading, and in case anybody's watching me, which they're not, but looks like San Antonio is going to win this one, and Wembenyama has
see it and 1-3.
hit an and 1-3. It's about time. For the most part, it's been an unremarkable showing, in my opinion, but at the same time, I didn't really expect Wembenyama to do any more than I would expect any other rookie to do, that is getting acclimated to a new league and new rules and a lot of new things. So he's being hit with a lot of things at one time. There's no way to say that he did a bad job or he did a good job. He did his job. That's all you could say. Is, stat sheet might not look the greatest, but it doesn't look the worst either. And the same could be said for the number two pick and a lot of other guys. I think that Jim, can't remember the kid's name, number 30% Antonio, looks like champagne, but it's not pronounced the same. kind of rhymes, but that wasn't intentional. But he had a really good game. Both sides of the ball did great. Throw that in. So now that we've established what card grading is, how it's done, and why people do it. People do it for a number of reasons. Maybe someone does it because they want to increase the value of their card. Maybe someone does it because they want to help preserve their card on a display, a showcase, whatever the case may be. Keep it, safe, because basically it is encased in a slab, which is what it is referred to. And essentially, it's two pieces of plastic with a label, and it'll have the grade. It'll give you a description of the card, including the year, the player's name, and of course, it's going to have the series, set, subset, if applicable. Sometimes you'll get subgrades on each individual item, and as far as the companies that do that, none of them are PSA. PSA grades on a 1 to 10 scale would have grades up to 9. So you can have a PSA 8, a PSA 8.5, and a PSA 9. From then you go to the 10, which is the top of the food chain as far as PSA is concerned and the grading scale is concerned by PSA. Now, I don't necessarily have any problem with PSA, and like I said, I don't have any problem with graded cards. Graded cards in a lot of ways, the guy that gets that card, he sends it in. I'll just use PSA as an example. It's kind of like buying a new car. You're going to take that first hit, all right? You're going to be that guy. And depending on what that card does, how that player performs, unless we're talking about baseball, to where statistically speaking, you don't necessarily have to win a World Series to be a Hall of Famer and an all-time great. Ken Griffey Jr. being an example. So, with that said, submit this card. It might be a high dollar card. I would assume that if you're going to submit a card, it's going to be one of value, actual monetary value at the time at least, which also is another thing to factor in. If they're backed up and submissions are way behind, you submit a card that might have comps at $1,000, and then you get it graded, get it back. A, it's not the grade you thought it was going to be, not because it failed your eye test, but somebody else didn't feel that it was. And this is a certified professional grader, so they're going to have a little bit more pull, a little more knowledge and authority, or so they think, than the average person. But then again, you have to give the average person a little bit of credit for being aware enough and hopefully understanding that what he's sending in, if he's sending it in to increase its value, whether he wants to flip it, whether he wants to, watch the value climb, drop, depending on the players, what the situation is, it doesn't matter. But if you were that guy that had that $1,000 card and 3 months down the line, you finally get it, and now it might be, you thought it was going to be no less than a 9, but it comes back a 7. And instead of $1,000 at the time, this car is now dropped to $300, which if you don't think it happens all the time. Then you waited for nothing. You could have sold the card when you had the card, probably in raw condition, like a lot of people have done. And I'll use Wembanyama as an example. I think right now people buying his cards and then finally having a chance to watch and see him play and watch him miss layups at, without shoes, he stands 3.5 feet tall. There is not a lot of need to really elevate beyond a few inches from the ground for this individual to put the ball into the basket. And in basketball, generally, the closer you are to the basket, the better the chances of making the shot. The further away you are, the further away your target is, makes it more difficult. This is common sense. Anyway, sorry, I'm with you. And I'm sure that his cards are going to fluctuate a little bit. Maybe some people are not happy with the way that he performed or expected him to do more, but it doesn't really matter. It's one game, and the market's going to do what the market does, and it might not do anything at all. Who knows? Did he fall short of expectations? not necessarily. I don't think that his stat line is going to be anywhere near as important as how he played and how he carried himself and what he was able to do. Was he impactful on the court? Was he a good? Was he enough to be disruptive on the court in a good way to cause his team to go on to victory? Maybe. Maybe there, I mean, the score at the end, we're looking 68-76. Okay. So an 8 point game. Of course, you know, place is sold out, place is packed. Hasn't happened since what, 2019 when Zion made his debut. So I got hope in the kid. I think it's going to take a little bit of adjustment. You got 9 points, 2 out of the 13 from the field, 8 blocks, 5 rebounds. But I think he had a couple assists, if I'm not mistaken. So I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, they're not showing how many minutes he played, but I believe he played right around 27 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. So there's nothing wrong with that. Kid did fine. Good job. Proud of you, Libby. Hope you have a long and successful career. Wish you nothing but the best. But here is the back to the card grading again. The thing about the card grading is it is similar to me, the way I see it, to what banking was in its infancy, sorry, when we were still establishing something as a centralized bank. So you might have had 100 banks, 200 banks, however many banks, but the rate of currency in the exchange didn't always translate. So until we actually had a standard and a way that we could put everything into perspective to where we have everything in uniform, we can go to any state where we are here and use our currency. Very simple. So if there was a standardized way to grade a card without involving someone's subjective, potentially biased, whether you want to call it a viewpoint, whether you want to call it, I'd even say just throw their silent opinion in. They don't have to say anything, they can think it. And that would be enough to throw off them in the grade of a card. They would cause it to be devalued or not as valuable as it should be. And that, you know, that's one problem that I think needs to be addressed is just to have a standard of what grading is more than what I mean by that is you still have your four pillars, your corners, your edges, your surface, and your centering, but have a uniform industry standard. And whether it is done electronically, computerized through a machine that has some super sophisticated scanner with lights, and I know there are a handful of companies out there that are in the card grading that do use computer AI based grading. I know Tag is one of them, and I think HGA does as well, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that's a better way. If you have a reference point, you can measure whatever you want, whether it be distance, whether it be the dimensions, whether it be the degree of the corners, whatever whatever it may be on a card. A machine is going to be able to do it more accurately, more efficiently, more quickly than any human being. I don't care how good your eyes are. It doesn't matter. I don't care what lights you got. It doesn't matter. You're not going to be able to do it better than a machine. This is true. So what happens then without it being standardized is a twofold thing. Right now, you basically have one giant whale as far as grading companies go that is unremarkable in their. I mean, PSA does not impress me. They're about as vanilla and plain and just they they have no eye appeal to me personally because it's just whether it's an old PSA slab or a new PSA slab, they just don't pop. Whereas some of these other grading companies, they'll adjust color to the slab to fit the card to make it look nice, and they'll do different things. PSA, it's just you know the plastic. The slab itself, there's nothing remarkable about it. It's got a little piece of paper at the very top of the slab with its serial number, and you got your QR code on the back, serial number and barcode on older ones without the QR code. And the problem is, this one whale doesn't control the market, they dominate the market. And as much as you might like another grading company and you want to get your card graded to increase its value because you have a good card, you want to send it to PSA because it's going to have the most value if it grades highly. But you're also, here, let me take my glasses off because that glare is getting on my nerves. That shit was probably driving you crazy too. So these other grading companies that may be just as good, if not better, than PSA, with technology that PSA may or may not possess, that might be superior to what PSA actually even uses, I feel that you're not going to be able to manipulate a machine unless you want to manipulate a machine to work your way. And if, like I said, with a reference point, regardless of what it is, you will be able to get an accurate, honest grade without bias, without any kind of, whether it has eye appeal or not. A machine does not care. If it's only looking at those four principles, pillars, if you will, of center, surface, corner, edge, and that's all it's worried about, and it's measuring all the way around, and it has some sort of reference, whether it be on the card or something similar to it, or it, there are people far more intelligent than me that have figured this out and have put it into use. And like I said, the problem with that is the PSA completely dominates the market right now. So value and PSA are associated with one another. Therefore, what I'm saying is there is no real incentive in the mind of a lot of people to go to anyone other than PSA. And the problem with that is PSA doesn't necessarily mean that they're the best. Honestly, like I said, I pretty much explained how I feel about PSA. I think they're just a boring, vanilla, plain, cheaply produced, you know, piece of shit. I don't know how else to say it. I think that there are the other companies, some of them newer, some of them more established, that do a much better job. And I think if there was a standard across the board in the grading industry, and that being not done subjectively with bias by people and left to do by machines, and only to focus on those four things, the centers, surface, edges, and corners, that standard that would be set would be followed by each and every grading company. Okay, follow me. Therefore, allowing them the opportunity to be able to compete with PSA, because at this point in time, we'd be on the same level playing field. Okay, because they're going to be held to the same standard as BGS, as CGS, CSG, BCG, ISA, or any of the other three-letter acronym grading companies, of which there are. And there are some really good companies. SGC, GMA, I think they're great. Beckett's probably my favorite because they look like they really care about what they do, and I think they do a great job. They're not throwing out, I understand population control, and that's a whole nother subject within itself, but I just want to talk about the fact that there is no standard in grading right now to where it's a level playing field for everybody to be able to have a chance to compete in the same market, but do it based on the same standard. That standard needs to be set and held, and that set standard that hasn't been established by anybody as of yet will create more competition. And if you understand business, then you will understand that competition is not only good, but it is vital and necessary in order for commerce and for industry to not only survive and grow, but to prosper. Okay? So you have to have competition. And without it, it's basically you've got a monopoly. And right now, you've got PSA. And if you comparatively look at all the other grading companies, they come nowhere even close to the volume of grading they do. They've actually had to lower prices and try to change their business plan and try to modify things in order to try to get more business in so they can try to compete with this whale out there that wants to dominate everybody else. So it makes it difficult and it's hard for these other guys to compete. And the last thing you want is to have no choice and have only one grading company if value is what you seek. And therefore, you will have no choice but to go to one place. You limit yourself, you don't give yourself any options. So, like I said, it's very similar to when we you would have a check from a bank in New York in the you know mid to excuse me mid 19th century, early 20th century. So it didn't necessarily mean that the bank that you had the check from in New York, and then if you travel to Chicago or Kansas City or California or wherever Florida, it doesn't matter. It's not going to necessarily be the same type of communication. You might be speaking Swahili and Japanese because it's not gonna jive. So until it got organized and there was a standard set in place for finance, in this case, it was a mess. It was just a mess. You can do your own history and your research. I'm not going to go through a history research lesson, not tonight at least. We can do that. You got a request, I'll do it. And I'll always read comments and people leave them and watch anything that I got to post. And I appreciate it all once again. So basically, grading right now is being dominated by one company, and that company being PSA. Other companies are out there. They've got technology that PSA may or may not adopt or have adopted in their own way or looking to adopt, whatever the case may be. But I think that you need to look at it and take it with a grain of salt and think long term to a point of being able to see the forest past the trees and see that grading might take a totally different turn than anybody could ever expect. And these cards that were graded originally that had potential bias and subjectivity associated with the final initial, you know, final grade plays a part in resubmitting it to a different type of system if it were put in place that is going to be followed by every grading company out there. That way, the value shouldn't make that much of a difference. I would think that, in fact, rarity and exclusivity would eventually take hold and allow some of these other grading companies that are great grading companies. I've had several cards from several different grading companies, and I really like a lot of them. I think the slabs are very they forward thinking and not just the same. Just it's just a boring slab on PSA. So that's what I think about grading. There needs to be a standard set, and only you know there's no purpose on manipulation of a machine in order to work your angle. In this case, if you want to do honest business, and there is such a thing as honest business, you just have to find the right people to work with, and they also exist. There's not a lot of us out there, but there's enough of us. So, with that said, basically, long and short of grading is it needs a lot of work. It has been around for a while. It's nothing new, but at the same time, it is still in its infancy, in my opinion. And once it is standardized throughout the industry as a whole, in the grading industry as a whole, and they all use the same type of equipment that does not involve anything more than a human placing a card into whatever apparatus they use to determine its actual, you know, it, its actual specs based on, it doesn't matter if it's a die cut card or anything else. It's going to measure it perfectly, and it's going to do it objectively. It's not going to care if it's a cam reddish or a can of potatoes. It's going to do what the machine is supposed to do. It's going to get measurements. It's going to have special lights. It's going to be able to detect and tell you everything you want to know about this card far better than any human being would do with a magnifying glass, his own special lights, and anything that he may have in his equipment. So there's my take on that. Needs to have a standard based on the same four principles of grading. Take the subjectivity completely out of it, and I'm all for these newer companies that are doing their best to try to hold their own and going up against a big guy like that. I got nothing but the utmost respect for them, and I hope they succeed. And if I decide to submit any cards, which I have no interest in doing honestly, because I can give me a nice one touch. And there's other custom cases that I can put some of my most prized cards, unless I want to buy a specific player that's in a graded card case slabbed of a certain company, then I will do it. And I don't necessarily care about what value it is, if that makes sense. I care for the player, the card, and not the grade. That is not as important to me. Neither is the value, because I'm not in it for the money. That is not my motivation. So there's grading. That's grading. You got any questions? You ever want to chime in on it? Leave your comments. Let me know. Let me know what you think. That's what I think. That's how I see it. And then the other thing I wanted to discuss is the influx of people during the pandemic times and how that has definitely had a effect on the market and the hobby, which has now turned more into a business. There again, my take on this. You don't have to agree, you don't have to disagree, because there's no right or wrong answer. But the way I see it, and having collected for as long as I've collected, and as many cards as I have, and seeing all the different, you know, when you've been collecting and you've continued to collect, the one thing that you've noticed is A, the number of people that come in the hobby, B, the prices and the increases in cards and print runs and variations, everything else that goes along with it is increased exponentially to try to satisfy the supply and demand, which at this point is, I think there's still going to be a lot more of a decline based on certain factors that I follow and I research. You can do your own research, and whether you pick certain players, cards, sports, whatever the case may be, you will see that the growth is stunted versus what it was during pandemic times. And prior to pandemic times, you had at least you had consistency and you had affordability in the hobby. And it was still, for the most part, considered and treated as a hobby. Of course, you have people that sell and make money doing it professionally. There's that's America, and last I checked, it's a free country. You got a thing, you got your jam, you make your money, you do it how you do it, as long as it's not immorally, illegal, or unsafe. Hey, uh, nothing but love for you. But a lot of the people that enter the hobby, whether they were collectors as children or whether they wanted to try to cash in on an opportunity to be able to, quick rip and flip, whatever their motivation was, the effect I feel that it had on the hobby in just the fluctuation and destabilization of prices, to where people, I mean, there's a lot of people that listen to a lot of people, which, you can't control. You can control your actions, and you can control who you choose to listen to, and you can control to tune out the noise and all the bullshit that goes along with a lot of what people say, and make your own decision. But take this for what it is. Educate yourself and, you know, bet on yourself and trust yourself. If, you know, go with your gut. This is nothing new. So a lot of the guys that came in, and this is true, they didn't have the hobby in their best interest. They had profits and money making in their best interest. And not everybody. There's people that, you know, were in a position to where they might have not collected and decided they want to start collecting again, so they decided to start collecting. There's guys like me that have been collecting, never stopped, and just watched this madness go on and said, "What the fuck is happening? Why is this going on?" And then, of course, you realize that once everything was shut down, and as much as people love sports and how popular sports are, not only here in America but worldwide, it had a big effect on people. So between gymnasiums being closed, parks being closed, major sports being shut down, delayed, stopped altogether, the certain, you know, there were a couple leagues that I think, what was it? I don't know, a couple shit football leagues, but they went bankrupt. You know, a lot of bad came out. Not to mention, you know, the loss of life, of course, but it brought in good people to the hobby that have a genuine love and interest with what it means and what it brings and the community that it can build and all the good things that come from the hobby. But then at the same time, you've got people that don't necessarily care about the hobby, but they want to make money. And I understand that as well. It's this is this is what capitalism is. You can capitalize on a good opportunity. You strike when the iron is hot, and that's simple. It's simple. And it takes a relatively intelligent person to be able to do that and be successful at it. It also, on the other side of the coin, takes a lot of risk. And with any risk, there's going to be a chance and the possibility of loss. With that being said, with today's current market and how it sits, and there's certain players that were so hyped up and so, just everybody talking about them, and people paid so much for these cars, and then I see these prices just falling. It doesn't break my heart, but it breaks my heart to see that happen to the hobby. And if the people that had the opportunity that bought these cards at these high prices at that time, whether or not they had the means to do it without over leveraging themselves, I have no idea. But whatever the case may be, people who are well off, okay, for the most part, they know exactly what they could spend and they know what they can afford. So they know what they're doing with their money. They didn't establish wealth because they're stupid, unless they're stupid. And there's plenty of stupid people with money too. But when you spend, let's say you bought some kind of Luka Doncic. I just say Luka. No, I'm not going to use Luka. I like Luka. I see an upside to Luka. He's all right. But if we look and see someone, let's say like Zion, who has spent more time sitting than playing, and as high as his cars were to where they are now, that is an incredible amount of loss to take, whether or not you are wealthy or not. And wealthy people that spent that kind of money, believe me, they'll tell you it's no big deal dropping the bucket. And for some of them, it may be, but in all actuality, what people with money hate is to lose money. Okay. So a lot of people that came into the hobby to cash in on it due to circumstances like the pandemic weren't necessarily in it for the right reasons. And a lot of people that came into the hobby because they missed the fact that there were no sports available, the gyms were closed, playgrounds closed, parks closed. What are you going to do? You can only watch so many repeats and reruns and listen to so much garbage on YouTube. And you know, I don't think I'm garbage. And thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you. Thank you for listening to me. Uh, I don't mean to be long-winded, but I don't mind talking. I'll talk to a wall in a hall all day. So the long and short of it is, a lot of the people that came in the hobby are wonderful. They really have a passion for it. They love to collect. They still love to trade cards. They love to interact in various groups, various, social media outlets and platforms. I don't do a whole lot of social media. Really, I only have a Facebook, I think, and then, or at least that's the only one I really use. And I don't do, I, if I have a Twitter, I don't know, or an Instagram or a Snapchat, or I know I don't have a TikTok. And yeah, I don't know what else is out there. But Facebook, maybe it's because I'm old and I've been on it since its inception. Maybe that's why I'm still there. I don't know. And there's a lot of hateful people on Facebook. So if you get on there and you post something in certain groups, don't let anybody get to you. Just drown out that noise, post what you post, do what you do, be yourself. Don't be afraid to take that risk and, put yourself out there. Don't be scared, because these keyboard commandos, they're guys like me, they're guys that are just, they're just regular people. Don't let them intimidate you. Don't let them get in your head, and don't let them try to tell you that what you do is wrong, because what you do ultimately matters to no one else but you. And if you're happy with what you do, and if you're happy with purchases that you make, then you've done the right thing. Okay. So don't let people put you down when it comes to this hobby and how they collect. And don't try and keep up with other people just because you see them post a card that they pulled and it's some kind of super magic, zebra, parallel, ice, prism, fast break. Uh, God even knows what else. Who knows? It's madness. But my point is that a lot of good people came into the hobby, and I'm glad that they're here. They really make it a wonderful hobby, and it's okay to treat it as a business. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And if that's what you do, then that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not going to tell you don't do it as a business. Strictly hobby. Don't rip and flip. Breaks are bullshit. No, I'm not going to tell you anything like that. Collect how you want to collect. Collect who you want to collect. But have the presence of mind to know where you stand, not only financially, but the risk that is always going to be a potential factor in any, whether it's a lottery ticket, a scratch off, or a pack of cards. Doesn't matter. Always going to be a potential risk involved, and there's going to be a potential for loss involved with that risk. So keep that in mind. Collect within your means, collect within your budget. At least that's what works for me. That's what worked for me in the past, and that's what I stick with. And for the last 40 years since I've been collecting, I've maintained the same basic principles, and I haven't changed. Consistency, consistency. I don't know what else you guys would like to talk about. Those were the two real things that I had, and I'm gonna try to read without my glasses, which is like wondering if I'm having a stroke or not. But if there's anything that you guys would like to chime in on, and I know there's one person watching right now. We had some other guys earlier, and thank you for staying and tuning in. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. And if there's anything that you guys want to talk about that interests you, that you would like to hear me speak on, I would love to do so. And if there's anyone who would ever like to come on with me and be a guest and take some time, and we can talk and discuss things, and maybe we can get some other people to join in, and we can make it fun. We don't, this should be a fun hobby. It almost makes me sad to a point to where this hobby that I remember as a child, and as it's once again, I apologize. I've been a little under the weather today. Uh, this hobby, which I loved since I moved here to the States, and I've been doing for the last 4 years, that I was able to afford it as a child. As difficult as it was to even come up with a dollar or even 40 or 50 cents, I was able to do it. But right now, somebody, a child, a kid, I don't know that many, 7, 8, 9-year old kids that have the kind of money that it takes to buy some of these cards, to buy some of these packs, buy some of their favorite players. And there's nothing wrong with being able to get the favorite player that you like. That doesn't necessarily have to be a product of one of the big guys. In this case, I might as well call it Fanatics, since they pretty much have everybody but Upper Deck leave stage and hit. So there's nothing wrong with getting a leave a stage a hit from your favorite player. There's nothing wrong with that. If that's the way you want to collect, and that's what you can afford, and that's where your budget allows you to spend, then you stay in your lane when it comes to that. And that's not me telling you what to do. I'm not influencing anybody. I'm sharing with you my thoughts and how I look at things, my perspective, and the way that I view things. Aside from that, guys, I know it's getting late. I've been averaging about, at least around 40 minutes. I think this is actually my shortest podcast. But like I said, I enjoy conversating. Whether anybody watches, nobody watches, it still isn't going to deter me or discourage me in any way to continue to put content out there and, and organically build a following. If that happens, wonderfully. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. If I make some friends, that's even better. But if I can help somebody, ultimately, I think I've done something good. And I'm going to continue to do what I do. I'll share my knowledge with you. I'll share my thoughts with you. And I'll listen to what you have to say and anything that you guys would ever like to chime in and talk about. I think next episode, I may or may not go on until tomorrow or Sunday. I've got some things for the weekend planned. Nothing too exciting for the one-legged wonder here, but I like to try to keep myself busy as possible. So what I think I want to do is go into the different apps that are available throughout Android and iOS, and the read that I use and have a premium subscription and membership for are the Ludex, the Collects, and Cardbase. And I was gonna share a video with you live using all three, taking cards from different eras and different sports and seeing how well each one does and matching up that card, giving you an accurate value and price, and seeing how simple it is to use in the interface and if it's something that you enjoy. And I don't care about anybody sponsoring me. I don't need any kind of sponsorship. I'm not here for that. I'm here to be able to talk. And if I help somebody, they listen to me, fantastic. 2 thumbs up. That's why I'm here. I'm not here to be YouTube famous. I'm not an influencer. I'd rather be an encourager, someone who encourages, or somebody that would inspire. I don't want to influence you to do anything because that's I'm not that authority on anything. Unless we're talking about automotive, and then automotive wise, I can tell you quite a bit. But I am more so passionate about sports cars, especially now at this point in my life. So, guys, thank you so much. One thing I want to say, and I mean this: if you seek, then I encourage you to keep seeking. If you pray, I encourage you to keep praying. If you ask, then I encourage you to keep asking. And if you knock, I encourage you to keep knocking. You are heard, and you are listened to, and you will be answered. So don't ever lose hope, don't ever lose faith, and stay positive. Aside from that, I hope everybody has a happy and safe weekend. I wish you guys nothing but the best, and God bless. Thank you, guys.